Thank you very much. His Excellency President Denis Sassou Nguesso, my brother presidents and heads of state, our revered former UN Secretary General, Mr. Kofi Annan, very distinguished participants at this forum, and organizers of the Forbes Afrique Forum. Let me begin by thanking President Sassou Nguesso for his kind invitation to me to join you in this very interesting discussion about the potentials that this dear continent of ours has. There is a very well-known African writer from Nigeria, Chinua Achebe, who died recently, and I was there at his funeral. And he said something. He said, the lion is always the loser because it doesn't have its own storyteller. So wherever there's an engagement between the hunter and the lion loses because nobody hears the lion's story. It has been the same with Africa for a long time. Africa has not had its own storyteller. And so the perceptions built about Africa, the news coming out of Africa, were told by people other than Africans, were interpreted by mediums other than Africa. And so the image that had persisted about Africa for a long time was one of pessimism, that nothing good could come out of this continent. Fortunately, that perception is beginning to change. There are many mediums that are willing to carry Africa's story, and that is why I want to thank Forbes Afrique for creating this platform, one of many that in today's world is beginning to tell Africa's story. Africa has had a checkered history, and we have gone down the wrong path several times, sometimes as a result of our own faults, but also at other times as a result of the fact that we were led down the wrong path by international institutions and organizations. We ourselves have done damage to our countries and our continents by the instability that quickly gripped the continent after we emerged from colonialism. For most countries, mine included, a few years after independence, we made some progress, and eventually coup d'etat started to happen. The military took over. We returned to a republic. The civilian regime is promptly overthrown. Another military regime comes into place. And so from the late 60s until the early 1990s, we existed in a state of instability. And of course, you can't have any progress where you have instability and conflict. But aside from the instability we inflicted on ourselves and other things that we did to ourselves, we were also misled, I would put it bluntly, by international financial institutions like the IMF and the World Bank. For many years, these two institutions had one prescription for all economic maladies: structural adjustment. Remove all subsidies. And so my country was a star pupil of the IMF and the World Bank for many years. In the early 80s, and probably up to recently, we have been on IMF programs. And the condition is to remove all subsidies. In the decade of the 70s, this policy of removing all subsidies worsened poverty because there were no safety nets put in place to cushion the poor and the vulnerable while you were readjusting the economy. And so agriculture suffered. Agriculture was one of the prime targets of removal of subsidies. And the philosophy was that the African farmer must learn to compete. And so subsidies on fertilizers were taken away, subsidies on agro inputs were taken away, subsidies on improved seeds, and everything was taken away. And the poor African farmer was left to compete with farmers in other parts of the world who used not only modernized agricultural techniques, but were subsidized by their governments. I mean, if you put two boxers in the ring with that kind of disparity, obviously the result would not favor the African farmer. And so the result was that our economies became import dependent, even for the most basic items that Africa had a comparative advantage to produce. We became import dependent on other countries. And that is how come Africa consumes so much rice and is not producing enough of its own. That is why we're consuming almost all the milk that we drink in Africa is imported. Almost all the chicken. At least as for chicken, our grandmothers and great-grandfathers, could raise chicken to feed us. And yet we lost the ability to even raise our own poultry. Maize became imported. Fruits and fruit juices all became imported in a continent that you could describe as paradise. In addition to this, non-tariff barriers were imposed on Africa, and so African exports were restricted from entering various markets. We probably have come full cycle, and today all of us recognize that it is necessary for society to progress as one, and that you cannot achieve the kind of progress you desire when one section of society lives in absolute wealth while the majority wallow in poverty. And so today we all as a world developed the Millennium Development Goals, and we resolved to cut in half poverty by 2015. We resolved to achieve universal primary education and gender parity in education. We resolved to eradicate HIV/AIDS. We resolved to cut in half maternal mortality. We resolved to ensure access to clean drinking water for people. We resolved to ensure access to sanitation. These are all goals that in the 70s were not heard about. And so all of us have been working to achieve these goals. And so what it shows is that typical capitalist concepts of economics to fix economies would not work in a continent like Africa. You need to advance the nations of this country in unison and not in segments. And so, as I said, we can't have a super rich segment of Africa enjoying all the fruits and the majority of our people living in poverty. And so what does it do? It cuts out our work for us. And these are the challenges that we face as leaders. Let governments create the right environment for the private sector to take opportunities to develop our countries. And we have done it before. And I had the opportunity to assist in Ghana as Minister of Communications to deregulate the telecom sector. And I remember at the time we started the deregulation and liberalization of the telecom sector, there were the apostles of doom. There were others who said the telecom sector was so security sensitive that if you allowed the private sector to come in, it could threaten the security of the state. Today, I look back almost 15 years on and see how far not only Ghana but the whole of Africa has come in respect of the telecom sector, and it is amazing. And the bulk of this investment has been done by the private sector, not by governments. We can repeat what we did in telecoms in other sectors. Let's deregulate the energy sector and let the private sector do what they do best, invest and produce energy to feed industry and for domestic consumption. Let us deregulate the transport sector and let the private sector do what they do best, invest in transport and be able to move our people across the continent. Let us let the private sector do what they do best. Raise investment for infrastructure while government concentrates on investing in the social sector to improve healthcare, to improve education, and other human development index indicators. What are the prospects for Africa and what are the threats? Africa has a very good opportunity and advantage because it has a rapidly growing population that is youthful. And so it means that there is a big labor force which, if well trained, could make Africa the center of business and manufacturing. But that also represents a threat because if the current growth rates that we're seeing across the continent are not translated into jobs, then we're going to have a threat from a growing population, a huge labor force that cannot find work on the continent. And so Africa's population is both a threat and an opportunity. What must we do as governments? It means that we must reorient our economies from what was handed down to us by our colonial masters. And I'm happy that President Sassou Nguesso and my brother, President Macky Sall, mentioned it. One of the critical things that we need to be doing as leaders is to promote value addition to the natural resources that we possess. And I'll use my country, Ghana, as an example. We are the second largest exporters of cocoa in the world. And yet, cocoa as a finished product is mostly secured from the advanced Western countries in the form of chocolate, in the form of drinking chocolate, all its manifested forms. And so we have for many years been exporting raw beans onto the international market, and the processing of these beans is completed in other countries and sold for many times more the price and value of the beans. In Ghana, we have increased local processing, and we're going to continue to increase local processing. We currently have capacity for processing up to 24% of our raw beans, and it is our intention to increase that to 50% of our raw beans in the future, in the near future. We have an aluminum industry, and the Volta River project, which is the Akosombo Dam, was built as a result of the aluminum smelter that was built by Kaiser Aluminium in the 1960s. Ghana has bauxite. What happens is the bauxite is mined, it is exported to alumina plants abroad, it is processed into alumina, the ingots are imported into Ghana to feed our aluminum smelter in Tema, and the aluminum is produced and re-exported to the world market. It is our intention to build an integrated aluminum project by fitting in the missing link to mine the bauxite, produce the alumina, feed the alumina to the aluminum smelter, and either export or use what we can in our own industry. You can say the same for gold. Ghana is a significant producer of gold. We mine the gold and we export the bullion in its raw form. After many years of exporting gold, we don't yet have a refinery in Ghana. It is our intention to build a refinery in Ghana to refine our gold and also build a jewelry industry to be able to export world-class jewelry. so that we don't export raw gold, have it refined, and go back and import world-class jewelry. It's the same with other countries, oil and gas. And one of our panelists gave that example, that for Nigeria, for instance, oil is exported in huge quantities, almost 2 million barrels a day, and yet Nigeria imports finished products, petrol, diesel, and all that. My own country, Ghana, is a young entrant into the oil and gas industry, and we produce nowhere near Nigeria. And so we must create a value addition even to this oil and gas industry. The issue of integration has been mentioned here, and I think it is critical. Trade among African countries is the lowest. The last figures I saw were about 11% of total trade in Africa is amongst ourselves. And there have been hindrances put to expanding this trade. I think that it is time for us leaders to start walking the talk. And that it is in the interest of all of us. It's a win-win for all countries in Africa that we increase integration and trade amongst ourselves. My own sub-region, ECOWAS, is probably the oldest economic sub-region in the whole world. It was formed in 1975, before the European Union was formed. And yet, despite the protocols that we have passed, there are still hindrances to integration. We don't yet have a free trade area. We have not yet even agreed on a common external tariff. Just recently, we met in Abuja in ECOWAS to agree on a common external tariff. At the last minute, one of our countries raised an objection and said they were not ready yet. And after 7 years of negotiation, we still have to wait for others to get ready before we're able to introduce a common external tariff. We must give meaning to integration if we are to move our countries forward. Another threat to Africa's development, and this is my final point, is the availability of power. Nobody will invest significantly in a continent when he's not sure that he will have access to reliable, affordable power. And if there's one challenge that we face in our countries, is that we don't have enough power. And yet we have the potential to be probably the biggest producers of power in the world. And that's why we need to deregulate our energy sector and allow the private sector to come in and produce power. Government on its own cannot leverage the kind of investment that is needed to provide the power that Africa needs. And so we should allow the private sector to come in. We've started to do it in Ghana with independent power producers. And we hope that that will grow and be able to interlink our transmission grids so that for those who have excess power, we can export power to other countries that do not have enough. Ladies and gentlemen, I wish to thank you for the opportunity to have participated in this conference. Thank you very much.
Le président du Ghana, après d'autres intervenants, vient de le souligner. Il est très important dans la plupart des